When we're looking at tackles for loss, well, that's Maxx Crosby, who's been the best player on the team for quite a while now. He's got 105 tackles for loss to lead the team all time. Welcome to this episode of Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I am Ernie Jennings, your host, and we will be covering the Las Vegas Raiders in this podcast. After this team, we will have concluded our coverage of the entire AFC. So if you want to see any of the other teams that I've put a podcast out on, you'll just have to go back and check out my previous podcasts, whatever team you might have as your favorite team from the AFC. So as I said, this is the last episode covering the AFC, and it will take on a look at the last place team of the AFC West, which, as I said, is the Las Vegas Raiders. Before I start, I want to mention that I am using kind of a makeshift setup as I'm on the road doing this podcast, so it creates a little bit of a logistical challenge, but hopefully everything's going to work out fine and we'll be good to go. So the Raiders finished the season with a record of 4 wins, 13 losses. The only team, in fact, in the AFC West to have a losing record. It's a very tough division. At home, they were 2 wins, 6 losses. On the road, 2-7, and a horrendous 0-6 in the division. That is rough. So, as I said, it was a tough division, and the Raiders have a lot of work to do to improve for the 2025 season. They've done a lot of things in the offseason to try to come out with a better team, and I think they will. How good they will be is a big question. In fact, that's a question for most of the teams in this division. Just where will the teams finish? What order from first to fourth next season? It's going to be a fun division to watch. But as far as the Raiders go, how do the Raider players of 2024 stand in relation to the greatest Raider players of all time? That's what we're going to find out in this episode of Just the Stats. So as always, we'll begin with the coaches. John Madden, from 1969 to 1978, has the most wins with 103 wins. Now, I know a lot of people may know John Madden from either Madden NFL, the game, or from maybe as he was a host on the TV show, as on the color man for the NFL games that he would be on. But he was a coach for 10 years. In fact, his record is very impressive. He had a winning percentage of almost 760, 7.759. That's 3 out of 4 games he was winning. In fact, he was, I believe, if not the fastest, the second fastest, but I believe he might have been the fastest coach to make it to 100 wins. But in some sense, it did take a toll on him physically, and he decided to give up coaching and move into other endeavors, which he was great at those as well. Tom Flores was second from 1979 to 1987. He had 83. And as you may know, the coach, brand new coach, is Pete Carroll. I don't know how many wins he'll end up getting for the Raiders, and how many seasons he even plays. I mean, he's getting up there in age, so we'll just see where he ends up on this list. Obviously, there's no way he's going to catch Madden or Flores or even John Gruden, who was third with 60. So we'll just see how that goes. But he is the new coach of the team, and we'll see how that plays out for the Raiders coming into 2025. So when we're looking at career leaders, we'll start with the passing game. We'll start with the quarterbacks. Derek Carr, from 2014 to 2022, was the leading quarterback as far as yards go. He had 35,222 for the Raiders in that time period. Losing record, though, Ken Stabler was second from 1970 to 1979. He had 19,078 yards to finish second as far as the Raiders go. And again, it's been a variety of quarterbacks for the Raiders. So nobody, Minshew last year, along with Aiden O'Connell, a little bit. And now with the new quarterback for the team. So we'll just see where they finish up this year as that goes. Geno Smith, that's who I'm thinking of as the quarterback this year. So again, none of these guys are going to set any records as far as career records go, I'm sure. I'm talking about Geno Smith, that is. But we'll see how they do in single seasons. They might set some records this coming year. When we're looking at touchdowns, Derek Carr, again, had 217 touchdowns for the Raiders, and Ken Stabler was second with 150. Those are your top two. As far as interceptions go, that's where Ken Stabler does jump out in the lead. He had 143 interceptions in his career with 150 touchdowns. That's not too good. You really would prefer at least a 2-to-1 ratio, but that was back in the 70s where a little bit different setup as far as defense goes in protecting against the pass. Now it favors, obviously, the quarterbacks, and the offense as often as they can possibly do that. When we're looking at the all-time sack leader for the team, it's Derek Carr. Derek Carr was sacked more than anybody in single season, and we'll look at that when we get there. But Derek Carr was sacked 264 times while a Raider, which led the team. Ken Stabler was second with 189. And again, those were your top two. So quarterback-wise, they had some good quarterbacks, but nobody that hung around for many years except for Stabler, Derek Carr. But Derek Carr never was that great. He was just he was always a good quarterback, not a great quarterback. Ended up with the Raiders with a 63 wins, 79 loss record. Just kind of basically describes his career. All right, so when we're looking at the best running backs, now this is something where the Raiders had some really good running backs. Marcus Allen is the number one running back. He had 8,545 yards in his career with the Raiders from 1982 to 1992. And interestingly, before him was Mark Van Eegen, who was a fullback. He's second all-time on the team. He played from 1974 to 1981. He had 5,907. Josh Jacobs was third, and if he'd have stayed with the team, obviously he had a chance to move forward, but he moved on, and after the 2023 season, he was third all-time with the team. Those are your top running backs. And again, they're moving on. They have the new rookie, Giante, and if he's as good as he looks, he has a chance with his career with the team to set all kinds of records rushing for the Raiders. When we're looking at touchdowns now, Marcus Allen had 79. He was impressive when it came to touchdowns. And in fact, in his career, he had 79 with the Raiders to lead the team. And he ended his career with 123 playing from 1982 to 1997. 123 rushing touchdowns puts him third all-time, only behind Emmitt Smith, who had 164, and LaDainian Tomlinson, who had 145. So Marcus Allen had a really good career all around. Now, when we're looking at the career-wise and the wide receivers, again, Tim Brown was by far the best wide receiver for at the time, the Oakland Raiders. He played from 1988 to 2003, and he ended up with 1,070 receptions. In his career, he ended up 7th all-time in the NFL with 1,094 receptions. So obviously, the vast majority were with the Raiders. He only had 24 receptions with the second team he played with. But so he led the team. Fred Blitnikoff was second. He played from 1965 to 1978. He had 589 receptions. Cliff Branch was third, playing alongside for a while with Fred Blitnikoff. He had from 1972 to 1985, he had 501. When it comes to yards, again, Tim Brown had 14,734. That's an impressive number to lead the team. Fred Blitnikoff, again, was second with 8,974. But with that yardage, Tim Brown finished 7th all-time. And again, all but 200 of those yards came with the Raiders. He ended up with 14,934 yards receiving. Like I said, finishing 7th all-time in the NFL. So really a great wide receiver for the team. And then when we're looking at touchdowns, again, Tim Brown, 99 receiving touchdowns for the team. Fred Blitnikoff, really a good wide receiver as well. He had 76 on 589 receptions. So really a good percentage, better percentage actually than Tim Brown as far as touchdowns go. Tim Brown had 99 touchdowns for the Raiders, and he had one more for the second team he played for. So Tim Brown ended up with 100 receptions in his career. Only 11 players had 100 or more receptions. So he's in an elite group of wide receivers or receivers in general who of the NFL. So very impressive. All right. Those are your top wide receivers. When we're looking at the tight ends now, as far as that goes, Todd Christensen from 1979 to 1988, he had the most receptions as far as tight ends go. He had 461 receptions for 5,872 yards. And again, what made Marcus Allen so great was not only did he lead the team all-time in rushing, he also was the top running back as far as receptions go. He ended up with 446 receptions in his career with the Oakland Raiders. So quite a running back. All right, let's move on to the defense and look at the best players as far as the defense goes. When it comes to interceptions, all-time was Willie Brown with 39 and Lester Hayes with 39. Willie Brown played from 1967 to 1978, and Lester Hayes played from 1977 to 1986. Both had 39 interceptions for their career. A decent amount. What's interesting is you're going to see Lester Hayes had 13 in one season. So a third of his interceptions came in one season. Kind of interesting. But those are your top two defensive players as far as interceptions go. And really, there's nobody current on the team that has any amount of interception. Trayvon Moehrig has 6. So nobody going to be pushing Willie Brown or Lester Hayes as far as interceptions go. When we're looking at tackles for loss, well, that's Maxx Crosby, who's been the best player on the team for quite a while now. He's got 105 tackles for loss to lead the team all time. A good number. I mean, he's on his way if he can keep up the pace he's been on, and he's very consistent to move into the top 10, maybe 4 or 5 years. 4 years, maybe he could get into the top 10. Khalil Mack from 2014 to 2017, and which is a short period of time, had 68 tackles for loss with the Raiders. So that's a decent amount of tackles for loss in such a short period of time. But those are your top two players. And again, so Maxx Crosby is currently with the team, so he's by far, and they just re-signed him, upped his contract to a nice, quite a large contract for him, but he really deserves, he's on the field almost the entire game of every game. Quite a active player when he's out there. When it comes to sacks all time for the team, Greg Townsend from 1983 to 1997 had 107.5 sacks. Howie Long, who played alongside him for a lot of years, from 1981 to 1993, had 91.5. Maxx Crosby's fifth currently with 59.5. He'll easily move into third. He only needs 3 sacks this next season to move into third place all time. But obviously, he's got a long way to catch Howie Long or Greg Townsend several seasons, even if he averages, say, 10 to 12 sacks a season, which is probably where he's averaging, actually. It'll take a few seasons to move into the lead all time in that category. So those are your leaders when it comes to the career stats. When we look at the single season leaders, and we'll start with the quarterbacks in the single season, Derek Carr does stand out, and you'll have a variety of quarterbacks. Even though Ken Stabler is one of the more famous quarterbacks for the team, they just never threw the amount of yardage that some of the later quarterbacks did, especially Derek Carr, who holds 4 of the top 5 spots. But Derek Carr in 2021 threw for 4,804 yards. That's the most yardage that anybody ever had for the team. And really, there's only been 6 times that there's been somebody threw for more than 4,000. It was only Derek Carr did it 4 of those times, Carson Palmer once, and Rich Gannon once. So really, Derek Carr's been at the top of this list in most categories. Now, when it comes to touchdowns in a season, well, first, before we get to that, as far as the yardage goes, like I said, as far as yardage goes, Derek Carr had 4,804. When it comes to touchdowns, Darryl LaMonica had 34. This past season in those 2 categories, Gardner Minshew led the team, but he only had 2,013 yards. And O'Connell had 1,612. Those are your top 2. Gardner Minshew also had 9 touchdowns, and O'Connell had 8. So really not very impressive as far as touchdowns passing go. In fact, they had 19 touchdown passes between 3 different quarterbacks. Really nothing to brag about, especially when you had Joe Burrow throwing for 4,918 yards and 43 touchdowns to lead the NFL. So really nothing impressive. So Darryl LaMonica, 1969. This is a record since 1969 of 34 touchdown passes. You would think that would be a record that I think Geno Smith has a definite chance of setting the record, at least a very good chance. Last season, in fact, there were 6 quarterbacks. Let me count this up really quick. Right, 5 quarterbacks actually that threw for more than 30 touchdowns. In fact, the 35 touchdowns was as far as 30 goes. So there was 5 of them that did that. So we'll see. Geno Smith had 21 for Seattle. So I don't know if he'll get to 34 or not, and especially with the emphasis on the running game. So I'm going to backtrack on that and say that Geno Smith won't break the record. I would doubt it seriously, but we'll see. All right. When it comes to interceptions in a single season, Ken Stabler had the most, 30 interceptions in a single season. 1978, he had 30 interceptions, and he had 16 touchdowns. Not a good ratio. Not a good ratio at all. I always thought he was a good quarterback. When I look at these numbers, I'm like, interesting. Sometimes not as good as I thought. But yeah, so 30 interceptions that he had. Last season, like I said, Gardner Minshew had 10 interceptions and 9 touchdowns. So not a ratio you want to have. As far as the entire NFL, Baker Mayfield for Tampa, Kirk Cousins for Atlanta, and Geno Smith for Seattle all had 16 interceptions. Actually, I should say Geno Smith had 15, and Baker Mayfield and Kirk Cousins had 16 apiece. So those are your top three. But with 10 in 10 games that he's played, that's not a good ratio. Yeah. So 10 put him at tied for 16th, but if he'd have played an entire season, he would have been probably at the top or somewhere near there. Gardner Minshew has always been a good backup, but as far as a starting quarterback, really leaves something to be desired. So when it comes to sacks, Jeff George in 1997 was sacked 58 times. Derek Carr in 2018 was sacked 51 times. Those are the top two as far as sacks go in a single season. And as I was saying, David Carr now wasn't with the Raiders, but he was sacked 51 times with the Raiders. But when he was with Houston, he was sacked 76 times to set the NFL record. David Carr, also with Houston, 3 years later, was sacked 68 times. So you can see that Derek Carr has been sacked a lot of times in his career, way too many times, way more often than he would like to acknowledge. But that's probably what makes it tough when you're sacked that many times in a career. Not enough times, though, to make the top 8, but still quite a bit as far as his whole career goes when you add up the different times he was sacked. All right, so let's look at the running backs single season-wise for the Raiders. All right, and again, Marcus Allen, all-time, led the team. In 1985, he had 1,759 yards in 16 games, averaging almost 110 yards a game. Josh Jacobs in 2022 came close. He had 1,653. Those are really by far the top two seasons. I mean, Marcus Allen's next best numbers-wise was only 1,168 yards. So he had that one season in 1985 really busted out as far as the yards go. When we're looking at players last year as far as rushing goes, well, this is why they recruited Giante as their number one pick. Alexander Madison led the team with 420 yards. That's abysmal, honestly. You don't have a passing game. You don't have a running game. Makes it tough to win games. Decide they won 4 games. I mean, the defense was good, but if you're on the field all the time, it's just too difficult. They really had a very poor running game. So it's going to be quite a difference to see how the team looks this coming year. When we're looking at touchdowns all time for the team, Pete Banaszak, I remember him, which shows my age, but he would come in when they were within the 5-yard line, probably more like the 2 or 3 yard line, and get the ball and usually could get a touchdown. But in 1975, he had 16 touchdowns. Pretty good amount of touchdowns considering he only had 187 attempts and he had 16 touchdowns. Marcus Allen in 1984 had 13, and Josh Jacobs in 2022 had 12 to lead the team. And again, Alexander Madison this past season had 4 touchdowns. So I really don't even want to compare it to the leaders in the NFL last year because they're not even, I mean, you wouldn't have them as a backup, any of these guys, second, third string on some of these other teams. So just an abysmal level of rushing. Now, it's a different story when you're looking at the wide receivers or the receivers in general. Last season, Brock Bowers set the record for most receptions in a single season for the Raiders with 112, breaking another tight end who had the record. Darren Waller in 2020 had 107 receptions. So those are your top 2 receivers, both tight ends, to lead the Raiders as far as receptions go. As far as wide receivers, Tim Brown in 1997 had 104 receptions. Davante Adams in 2023, when he was with the Raiders, had 103, so he was close. And again in 2022, he had 100. So only 6 times has a receiver had 100 or more receptions for the Raiders, and Davante Adams did it twice. The only one to do it twice. Now, obviously, Brock Bowers just starting. How many times is he going to get 100 receptions? He's already got 101 this first year, so I don't doubt that he has a good chance to get 100 again this season, depending on how they do with this running game, but still has a good chance, I would say, to get to 100. When we're looking at the receivers, last season, Jamar Chase had 127 receptions to lead the NFL. Brock Bowers was third with his 112. Only Chase and Amon-Ra St. Brown for Detroit had more. He had 115, so just a couple more than Brock Bowers. So Brock Bowers had a tremendous year, and somebody the Raiders can really look forward to going into the next season. Jacoby Myers was second on the team with 87 receptions. So those are your top 2 receivers last season. Now, when we're looking at yards, again, it was Brock Bowers had 1,194 yards receiving. Davante Adams in that season in 2022, when he had 100 receptions, had 1,516 yards, which is the record for the Raiders, beating out Tim Brown, who had the record since 1997 with 1,408. Those are your top 2. So when we're looking at, as I said, with Brock Bowers, he came in at 12th with his 1,194 yards. Last season, despite the poor passing game, you did have 2 receivers for the Raiders who had 1,000 yards. Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers had 1,027. So that was 2 good receivers for them as far as the passing game goes. So Brock Bowers, with his almost 1,200 yards, ended up finishing 8th in the NFL as far as yardage goes. Not bad at all, really. So again, like I said, something to look forward to as far as the Raiders go. When it comes to touchdowns, all time for the team receiving wise, Art Powell in 1963. So this is a record that's stood for quite a long time, 62 years. He had 16 touchdown receptions in a single season, 16 touchdowns in 14 games, which is what they played back then. So very impressive. Oh, in fact, Davante Adams, the only one in the last 50 years to even get close. Davante Adams in 2022 had 14, tying Warren Wells, who in 1969 had 14. So really, there's nobody recently except for Davante Adams who had a lot of touchdown receptions. When we're looking at this past season, Brock Bowers had 5. And again, Jamar Chase just held court all over the place as far as receiving goes. He had 17 touchdown receptions. So those were the top to lead the NFL as far as wide receivers go. So a great season. But Brock Bowers, as I said, is somebody you can really look forward to. All right. When we're looking at the NFL as a whole, I should rather change that and say that when we're looking at the defense, sorry about that. I was trying to do two things at once. Not a good idea. But when we're looking at the defense, and we start with interceptions, Lester Hayes in 1980 had 13 interceptions, the most ever for the Raiders. Dave Grayson had 10, as well as Tommy Morrow. Grayson was 1968. Tommy Morrow was 1962. And again, this is a team that started in 1960. Lester Hayes in 1980 had the 13, which is good enough to time for second all-time in the NFL. Night Train Lane in 1952 had 14. This is one of those records I'm not sure can get broken in this day and age. It's possible. You had a player this past season who had 9 for Detroit, so it is a possibility. But it's just a difficult thing to ask. I'm looking up the stats as far as that goes, as far as defense goes, and for the NFL as a whole, and as far as interceptions. For whatever reason, every time I want to do this, the computer wants to give me a hard time as far as trying to push the right thing. And like I said, I'm doing this on the fly here. But Kirby Joseph for Detroit had 9 interceptions to lead the NFL. That's not bad, considering how hard it is in this day and age for interceptions. But he did lead the NFL with 9. Jack Jones for the Raiders had 3. And a couple of guys had 2, Morrig and Spillane. So really the defense wasn't bad. Like I said, Lester Hayes had 13. And he was famous for stickum on his hands, which was one of the reasons it ended up getting banned. Him and Fred Biletnikoff. It's like, if they touched you with their hands, you weren't going to get away. And Fred Biletnikoff is a wide receiver; he just could catch anything. But the stickum was something, and they ended up banning that. But Lester Hayes was famous for that. But 13 interceptions really was impressive in 1980. When you're looking at the list, he's the only player up that high. I mean, the rest of the players are in the 40s or 50s. So it tells you something about how well he did as far as interceptions go. Now, when it comes to tackles for loss, Khalil Mack and Maxx Crosby both have 23 tackles for loss to lead the team all time. Khalil Mack did it in 2015. Maxx Crosby did it in 2023. 2022, Maxx Crosby had 22. So he's been, as I said before, very consistent when it comes to his defensive play. And when looking last season, Myles Garrett led the NFL with 22 tackles for loss. TJ Watt had 19. Maxx Crosby was 7th last season with 17. So for him, a little bit of an off year, but most players would be happy with 17. But for him, it was a little bit of a down year. I expect to see him back up there in the 20s this coming season. And when we're looking at this last category of sacks, this is a category just like tackles for loss, where usually you're going to see players from the 21st century. But for this, for whatever reason, as far as sacks go, the Raiders haven't had anybody that's been that impressive. Tony Klein in 1970 had 17 and a half sacks, and Ike Lassiter in 1967 had 17 sacks. The only player from the 21st century and he finished third, to be on this list was Derek Burgess, who had 16 sacks in 2005. So they haven't had anybody, as far as sacks go, to be that high. In fact, Maxx Crosby led the team last season with 7.5. So that's an area where, while they seem to be halfway decent as far as interceptions and tackles for loss, that's an area where I'm sure they would like to see some improvement in the sack department. So that is your Raiders, kind of a mixed bag of a team. You have some great players on the team, Tim Brown, Marcus Allen, even today with Maxx Crosby. But a lot of turnover as well, which makes it hard to have some really great players. So we'll see what this year brings. There's a lot of excitement. Pete Carroll, well, he's always exciting kind of a guy when he's coaching. Let's see what he can do with the team and with some new and improved offensive players, more of a proven quality, high-quality quarterback with Geno Smith. And then, of course, Giante, the running back, who I'm very excited to see. In fact, I thought, as a Raider fan, I thought that's who the Raiders were going to, as a Jaguar fan, I used to be a Raiders fan when I lived out west, but now I live in Jacksonville, so I'm a Jaguar fan. But I thought the Jaguars were going to get Giante, and I was pretty excited about that. I'm still, of course, very excited about Hunter and seeing what he can do as a two-way player. That's also exciting. But I do look forward to seeing how the Raiders team plays. Like I said in the last podcast, it's going to be a very tough division. Obviously, the Kansas City Chiefs aren't going to give up their number one spot very easily, though if you listen to the podcast on the Denver Broncos that I did, I do think this is a year that Denver could overtake Kansas City. Obviously, it's going to be tough because they have to leapfrog the Chargers as well. So we'll just see. When it comes to the Raiders, obviously the problem they had when I said they went 0-6 in the division, that's got to improve. You're just not going to, if you can't win your division, you're not going to make the playoffs either as a wild card. Most likely, if you have 0 wins in your own division, you're just going to have to somehow come up with some upsets this coming season and see how they can improve. So that is a wrap for the Raiders. That's a wrap for the AFC. And as I said, next up is the NFC. And just like I did with the AFC, I'll begin with the East Division with the first place team. So that means I'm going to start with the Super Bowl winning Philadelphia Eagles. So we'll see what kind of team they had. Obviously, they're going to have a lot of great players, Saquon Barkley, and so it'll be fun to get into the NFC. Now, before I start with the NFC, I am going to start introducing podcasts that cover other things other than just the all-time stats for each team. When I started this podcast, I started with the all-time great players, career-wise, single-season-wise, and game-wise in the NFL. So if you want to listen to those, you can go back and go to the very beginning of this podcast, Just the Stats NFL, and listen to those. And you can do that. I appreciate it if you subscribe to this podcast, like the podcast. You can also get a hold of me on Facebook, X, or Instagram at Just the Stats NFL. I appreciate that. I look forward to hearing from anybody. And anytime I get a message from somebody, it's a good thing. So, as I said, that is a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL. And until next time, I'll see you then.